In this lecture, Professor A.K. Kaldor-Hicks explains how economic policies are evaluated.
How do I measure gain or welfare gain in a society? Question is, if there are groups of people, one is called A and one is A and B, imagine these are, remember B is in this case rich and A is poor. Okay, so the question is, if society wants to make a decision, what should be their criteria of decision? So one choice is take money from B and give it to A. The question is, does it mean society increases welfare? Pareto says, no, it does not. Pareto says, this is not an improvement. He said improvement means if both gains, or at least one gains. So remember the logic that Pareto was talking about. These are philosophical discussion. So Pareto said improvement means at least one of them must gain. If anyone loses, Pareto says, no, that's not a gain. That was Pareto's philosophy. And then there was also another big philosopher, Rawls. Rawls was, his idea was give to poor. He said, society should always try to help the poor and forget about rich. Whatever rich has done, if you give it to poor, that's called improvement. So remember, we are looking at social welfare gain. So remember, while we are defining what is a good thing in a society. So it's a philosophical debate of defining good. Good means not for me, but for the society. Kaldor and Hicks criteria was that look at this idea that gainers and losers, and if the gainers are bigger than the losers, it's a good thing. Rawls's idea was that just give it to the poor, forget about rich. So if I ask you and say, look, you want to do good to the society, which one would you belong? Which one is the best idea? Remember the idea of communist idea, which is also Marx's idea. So think about Marx's idea. Marx's idea was also very much close to Rawls's idea, that the power should be vested with the proletariat. Remember, his concept was proletariat. And the idea was the poor, which is the working group. His idea was not rich and poor. His idea was it is the working people. Or his idea was it is labor. They said labor should have all the right because they produce, and anything that you should do, none of them should take anything. It is the labor who should have the rights, and that was Marx's idea. So everyone was fighting on it. Which one you think is appealing to you?
Sir, Rawls' idea.
So if anyone has and that's an idea that you do not underestimate. It's a powerful idea. Yes. So if there is a political party tomorrow in Bangladesh and said, look, anyone has a house in the country, I'm going to take over more than one house and I will give it to someone.
Yes,
or if you have more than your living cost, and there are people who cannot find as much as they are. So the idea was I should take it from the rich and give it to the poor. Now these are interesting ideas. End of the day, and this is where one is an individually how you look into it, and then you look into the social dynamics. And economics is very smart. They will say, look, if you look into the social dynamic, think about that a society decided that if you are poor, I will help. And if you are rich, I will take. If that is the concept of a society, which is more or less Rawlsian society, and if this is a country called Bangladesh, and if you are rich, you will say, get out of this country as quickly as ever. So you will emigrate. So you say, leave this country if you are rich, because you are not going to survive. So over time, what will happen? The second point, and that is important for people to understand, why people are rich is more productive. One possibility is inheritance. But don't assume that all richness means inheritance. One possibility is inheritance. One possibility, I'm very productive. One possibility, I'm genius. Not just productive, very innovative. So the question is, if you have inheritance, and if you say, if you have inheritance and I will take property, the social dynamics will tell you over time what will happen. And these are issues for people to think about it. Over time, people will leave zero inheritance. You can catch the only one group who has already inheritance. But smarter people will say, we should not leave anything. That is how the society is going to decide. Social will say, look, inheritance should be zero, which means that I will never give anything, inherit anything, because my parents should either distribute it before they die, and that is a possibility. So parents will say, forget about all this giving to anyone. I will redistribute these resources. So that is a one possibility. Or people will not build up assets. So remember, if the society is, this is one country and this is another country, this is country B and this is country A, and if the society takes a decision against inheritance, people will divert these resources to this country. So your property will go to this country. So they will gain, you will lose, because you have chosen that if anyone has inheritance, I'm going to take their property. So remember, at one time India was very rich, if you go back to the history. And then society transferred resources through colonization. And as they have colonized, the Indian became poor and wealth went to the other continent, which is Europe. So remember, the transfer of resources across continent happens, and it all depends on public policy. And people don't understand that how public policies are very important strategies in designing creating a better society. So yes, it is very popular to say you should not inherit. An answer is, did I inherit, did I build up as resources by stealing? Answer is no. And if you give me that I cannot inherit, that means I should not build up resources if I did not steal it. If I steal it, punish me. Did I pay taxes to build up resources? Answer is, if yes, I should have it. I should have all the right on my taxable property. If you do not allow me to use my taxable property properly, and you say, no, I have more restrictions because you seem to be richer than others, then richer people will say, forget about building up more property, I will transfer it. Okay, I will send one of my children outside the country, become a citizen, I will give the asset to there, or I will become a dual citizen. So remember the logic of a society. If I'm more productive, and you say, no, productive rich cannot be rich, they are very bad people, then productive people will migrate. So now there will be migration. So remember, migration is a process. Not only that poor people migrate, smarter people also migrate. Why? Because they realize that I don't have enough opportunity here. This society has taken this policy, Rawlsian policy. And this policy is telling me that if I'm more productive, I have to migrate. If you're a genius, and because you have become rich because of ingenuity, you have invented things. And if the country says, no, you cannot be rich, the genius people also migrate. This is known as brain drain. So remember all this logic of the society, why people, so all of them are consequence of bad economic policies of the government. So if somebody said, oh, this is a fantastic philosophy, you are looking from your point of view. What is my point of view? Since I'm poor, I should receive some help. And I don't care about the rich. And the logic should be clear that if you think about that way, there is a social dynamics that will happen. happened to many countries in the world. So this is why public policies should be designed smartly. So if you say this is I'm poor and there is somebody else is rich, and you say, oh, it is better to take away from resources from him or her and give it to me, do not misunderstand them. Were they rich because of their ability or their parents' ability? None of them was crime. And if a society cannot recognize this brilliance, that society will eventually find out that richer people live. And remember, there are many countries. There are country A, there are country B, there are country C. Everyone is asking that come to my country. So the resources will move out of this country. And that is one of the reasons why many countries are living in a poverty trap, because the public policy domain is so weak context. Within that context of the history, certain philosophy is very good and is very, so you have to understand what is the context of it. If the context is misunderstood, then you make a mistake in your decision making. That's very common in many societies. Remember, Rawlsian philosophy was a good philosophy. It is a good philosophy once you believe that in a society, and this is important to understand, the rich people became rich because of bad activity. What is a bad activity? They occupied country and became rich. Unlawfully colonized an economy and became rich. Obviously, in that, so remember, it is the process of richness more important. So when you say Rawlsian philosophy, and I'm not saying that his philosophy was bad, it has an historical. Let's now go to one more issue, and I want to. This is a very interesting one. I like this one. So this is the what is known as Sitoboski test. This scenario. This is person A, and this is person B. So remember, this is B's utility, and this is A's utility. And imagine a public policy which is redistribution of resources from point A to point B, right? So this is the scenario. Resources, even if I'm here, that does not mean A does not have a resource, it has its own resources. So this is a public policy. If I create another public policy, which is this, so this is policy 1, and this is policy 2, then you can go to anywhere in this public policy and you'll find out that sum of utility means U of A plus U of B is always bigger for policy 2 versus U of A plus U of B for policy 1, because this line is always higher. Two policies, I'm talking about two types of policies. Under these two policies, if I take this policy, doesn't matter how you do it, this is bigger than this one. Let's say another policy which is 15 minus 10, and this becomes 5, then policy 1 is always a weaker policy than policy 2. So according to Kaldor-Hicks, if that is the case, this is perfect. What Sitoboski was saying is something different. His idea was, imagine this, and imagine this as a policy 1 and this as a policy 2. So now he was saying that if I check policy 1, then you realize that some of this, watch carefully, I was looking at policy 1, some of the utility here is higher. Why it is higher? Because this point is beyond this budget line. and this point is higher. So in other words, the policy 1 and policy 2 are not always higher. So if you are at this point, if you think about this is a point, if you take this policy below this, things will reverse. Things will reverse basically means things will change completely. If I look into this range, so in this particular range, you realize policy 1 is bigger than policy 2. And in this particular range, policy 2 is bigger than policy 1. And he said under this scenario, Kaldor-Hicks is also fails. So remember how smart these people are. He said Kaldor-Hicks test also failed. He said always use my test, and this is why it's known as Sitobosky test. That he said Sitobosky test, use my test and find out whether the domain is always true. If it is not true, don't jump into the conclusion that policy 2 is better than policy A, because it may happen that there is a point at which this flip has happened. And in this case, you should have stayed with this is a better policy, and in this case, this is a better. So your choice should be on this line and on this line, which means it's not always true. In this policy, policy 2 is always better than policy 1. So society will not have any discussion moving from policy 1 to policy 2. It is easier to switch from policy 1 to policy 2 because policy 2 is a great policy. Whereas in this case, policy 1 and policy 2 are not necessarily great, depends on the scenarios, where the initial scenario. If I'm here, anywhere here, if the society is anywhere here, then this is a better policy. So they said move this one. On the other hand, if society is anywhere here, they will say move to this one. So realize the policy shift has happened because where you are in terms of your policy domain, in terms of your scenario. So that's exactly what Sitobosky was explaining and said, look, sometimes Kaldor-Hicks criteria may fail. Remember why we're discussing all this, because in law and economics, we're going to change policies. And we have to say, if I make a policy change, there are gainers and there are losers, right? Currently, some people are already in certain scenario, very comfortable zone. If I want to make a change, the comfort zone will change. And if the comfort zone changes, is it a good zone or bad zone? That was the whole idea why we're talking about all this.
Please subscribe to this channel to receive updates on new videos.